Buscaino for being here as well. Thank you, Joe. Okay, with that, colleagues, I've got a number of items that I'm going to consider on consent, but before we do that, we have a number of speaker cards. So we'll dispel those first. Mr. Herman, we have a speaker card. So you've got 2 minutes on multiple subject items, and you've got a speaker card on every single item, and then one for general public comment. So if you want to come on up and stick to those specific items within your 2 minutes, if you're off topic, then we'll ask you to close out, go over to general public comment. General public comment should be under the purview of this committee meeting only, and this is public safety. Thank you.
Gotcha. Since the Police Commission is offering a gun intelligence for the personnel and animal welfare, did you know that there's an item today involving an OIS? Yeah, an OIS. Officer-involved shooting of a service animal or some type of animal, doesn't just say. Oh. But since that's just one item, let's go beyond that. Let's talk about the victim advocacy, because I fear for my life. I'm a white nigger in a dark skin. I fear for my life because every time I come to public meetings, I get threatened by that fat bitch Nuri.
Okay, so you're off topic. So go ahead. Okay, so that will.
Victims of advocacy.
Go ahead and start your 1 minute on general public comment. Then only items under the purview of this committee.
So now that the asshole decides to make up his own rules regarding the Ralph M. Brown Act, and legislative body here has no say-so when it comes to my individual right to be heard and intelligently speak out to fucking morons that don't get it. 60 seconds of fucking hell. That's the reason why you're going bald. Because like Jose Huizar, the fat ball fuck,
okay, so that concludes all of your time. Can you
left me homeless. I'm speaking, so I got to
disrupting the meeting.
No, don't interrupt the
You're
time. I'm
meeting.
Still speaking, goddammit.
Can you
let the clock run?
Now it's disrupting the meeting. Please call him out. So you are not speaking under items under the purview of
general public comment.
I'm not going to argue with him. Please show him out.
General public comment, 1 fucking minute.
If you're not going to leave the meeting, then you're trespassing. It's your last warning.
60 seconds.
Officers, please help him out. Now you're disrupting this meeting. Please continue to shout out and disrupt the meeting. We'll let the record end, continuing to do so. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other cards on any other items, colleagues, that'll conclude general public comment. He's still yelling out from the hallway, so we'll go ahead and note that as well. I'm going to ask for items for consent, now that we've had public comment on those. On items, I'd like to hold items 3 and 9 and hear both of those and ask for the remaining part of the agenda to be on consent. Okay, so that'll be the order with approval. So those are 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are approved on consent. Okay, then let's go ahead and hear item 3 first. That is the LAPD MTA agreement. Morning.
Morning, Councilman and Assistant Chief Michael Moore with the Office of Operations. I'm joined by Commander Ann Clark, Assistant Commanding Officer of the proposed Transit Service Bureau. It's
Tyler Munhall, CAO.
So the matter before you and before this committee has been discussed on a number of occasions, and today, for the sake of time, I'd like to, if the committee allows, to basically take questions rather than bore you, frankly, with details that I think many of you are well aware of. But we are certainly here at your direction and discretion.
Well, first let me start off by telling you that any of the details aren't boring whatsoever. This is
Compelling, I'm sure.
absolutely. So I'll go ahead and open it up to Councilmember O'Farrell to open this up if you'd like to open.
I don't really have any questions. I'm just so glad that LAPD is entering into this contract. I think it's been a long time coming. And just my own experience with some of the metro stops in the 13th District, I think that I feel very optimistic about how nimble law enforcement can be in terms of going in and out of the metro stops and providing a greater level of safety. And as we've discussed, I think in the past, we need more riders on the metro so that we can keep supporting different modes of transportation. And if people don't feel safe, especially women who travel alone, ridership is going to continue to suffer. So I look forward to working with all of you in the 13th District on this new plan, and I think it's just terrific.
Thank you. We're quite proud. We have already, as you know, begun regular patrols on the blue lines, and the feedback from both the operators as well as the commuting public has been nothing short of extraordinary. Our men and women have filled those posts very nicely, very diligently. They're providing a safe passage experience to the thousands of commuters on that line, and we look to expand that with the adoption of this contract, both for those rail lines as well as for transit bus services across the city.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and good morning.
Good morning.
Commander, good morning. Just to let you know, I've been working alongside Lieutenant Melanie Hainline in identifying a location to house some of these officers. We have identified our Watt Civic Center, where there will be their roll call opportunity, which is just a few blocks away from the blue line. I just want to recognize Lieutenant Hainline for her collaboration with my office, and happy to have more uniformed personnel in the district. A couple questions on the contract. We've been assured the MTA contract will not affect the LAPD status quo. I do think it's important, though, that once we know where these officers are coming from, it'd be reported back to us so that we have, in my district, many residents have raised the concern about officers being pulled away from our basic car areas, concerned about response times. Can we, and I know a number of them are tuning in and listening, can you just give us a sense of security and
Yes.
assurance that the officers are going to be assigned on this cash OT through the Metro contract are not going to be pulled out of patrol areas?
So, Councilman, and let me first say that to the listening audience, my apologies in the sense of not making an overview of this presentation. Just in the interest of time, this is a full agenda, and you have a full council meeting backed up behind it, so I'm trying to save some time for our presentation. But in short, the opportunity that is before this council and under the leadership of the mayor and his initiation of a allowance of a 5-year contract that would provide for policing services by LAPD on all bus and rail lines in the city of Los Angeles as a means of improving passenger safety, as well as the operators of those lines, their satisfaction, their sense of security. Those have been two overarching issues for the MTA for some time. Recognizing the Sheriff's Department, which has previously provided this information, this service, while it has strove to do so, we believe that as a city, that these are services that are best delivered by the local police station, the local police officer. In doing so, though, it's critical that we not jeopardize our staffing level that are in each of our respective 21 areas, and which goes to the manner in which this contract was constructed. It was constructed in a manner that, A, the full-time resources that will be assigned will primarily be done on a cash overtime basis, meaning that there will be a core group of field supervisors and permanently assigned personnel, such as Commander Clark and Deputy Chief Green, that will be the foundation, if you will, of day in, day out, those full-time, regularly assigned members. That accounts for 52 individuals of an organization of some 10,000 sworn, and about 17 civilians of an organization of 2,900 civilians. Both those components, the sworn and civilian full-time regularly assigned people, will be added to our table of organization, which will allow us to grow and replace. So they're not going to be people assigned out of the areas and not replaced. There will be individuals, both sergeants and officers and civilian personnel, that the full costs of those individuals will be provided for so the organization can grow into this new responsibility. Over a 5-year period, we are going to use then the majority of the shift work, the time of officers riding on the buses and riding on the trains on an overtime basis. What that allows us to do, in fact, our entire organization works on a compressed work or flex work schedule where they work 3 or 4 days a week. Having capacity to work an added day or shift is a ready capability. We surveyed this well over a year ago. It was our most popular survey in the sense of immediate response. Over 4,000 members of the organization within a few days indicated that they would be they'd be very happy to work added shifts if such a capability existed. By relying on those overtime shifts in lieu of full-time, the organization avoids having to build nearly 500 500 sworn positions. If we were to do this on a full-time regular assignment, then yes, we would see hundreds of officers that would have to be pulled from the areas. And that is the fear. Our assurance to this committee and to your council, to your community members, is that the formula here will allow us to have well over 100, about 140 additional officers each day in the streets that would otherwise be home and off of work. This allows the officers an added source of revenue. It gives them work that they're happy to do, and it does so that with an added presence of officers in the street, that's no cost to the city because it's actually being funded entirely by the MTA. So we see it as a win all the way around. Over the course of the 5 years, it is the desire of the department, as it is the MTA, that should funding be allowed, that we would incrementally grow, and this would become a full-time regular assignment. However, again, in a short 5-year buildup, this is the current model we think is most prudent, and that as the MTA's experience with LAPD grows and its funding and allowances grow, our ability to grow into that where these overtime shifts would eventually be replaced by regular assigned officers, we think is worthy of discussion. Over time, there is a limit, as there is in every industry, where the amount of time of using overtime versus regular staff needs to be kept in balance. We have established safeguards, we believe responsible ones, that will ensure the minimizing instances of fatigue, right, optimizing the employees' opportunity to work these shifts, and striking the right balance so that officers and the organization and the MTA and the riding public, which is most important, are all satisfied that this will be a win for the organization and for the city.
Appreciate the explanation and the assurances. I know Mr. Bonner and I put forward and demanded more officers on the streets in response to the concerns of our residents in our respective districts and throughout the city, and looking forward to continuing that dialogue with the police department moving forward. Thank you so much for the explanation.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard this issue several hundred times, I guess, over at Metro, it seems like. So I don't have a lot of questions. But one occurred to me today that I didn't think to ask earlier during any of the Metro deliberations. If an officer who is on overtime working Metro duty makes an arrest, and then on a separate day when they are not assigned to Metro needs to appear in court, is Metro paying for that appearance as well through overtime?
Yes, all the subsequent costs.
Okay.
So we'll simply identify that as a transit-related activity. Mm-hmm. And Metropolitan Division, MTA has been a very responsible partner. As your board member, you know, they are willing and understand that this responsibility will entail added responsibilities on the part of the department. And while they are obligated to ensure that they not overcompensate, they have been a great partner to work with in recognizing associated costs and being accountable for those.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, one last quick question, if you don't mind.
Take your time.
So back in the day when the then Council President Garcetti's office was across the street from the Western and Hollywood Metro station, I would go down there frequently, and I literally never, ever saw anyone from the Sheriff's Department in the office or making the rounds. But there's an office down there. I don't know if it's called drop-in, but at an office. In terms of the presence that you'll provide these metro stops and elsewhere, will you also be occupying or at least checking in to the facilities that are there that were available to the Sheriff's Department, but they never ever used, to my knowledge?
I can answer that. I didn't know there was anything at Hollywood and Western.
There is.
That was never revealed to us by MTA. We will certainly look into that. Our emphasis is going to be, obviously, the stations, but largely a felt presence on the trains, because we know that the mere presence of our officers on the trains, and we've seen this in the past few weeks on the Blue Line, is very effective, and it restores order and civility to the people that are on there. And we are there in part to encourage everyone to abide by the code of conduct.
Terrific. I always felt it was lost opportunity because all users must go by that office every time, and it was sheriff's, I don't know if it was drop-in center or sheriff's station or whatever, but those types of amenities should also be open to you if they were part of the previous arrangement.
We have been, so Councilman Busciano, thank you for the site availability. This effort, which is about 2 years, almost 2 years in the making, involves surveys and explorations and trying to understand what the organization is. We get smarter every day, and I suspect that we'll find things such as this office the latest revelation that will make this effort even better as it moves forward.
Terrific. I was always told that they would staff it, and it was literally never ever staffed. So don't know that we don't need everyone sitting behind a desk in an office, but a presence, right?
Yes.
People going in and out, uniformed officers going in and out, and just being around where the entrance is could have an effect.
The strength of this proposal that was subject to your approval is a physical presence and a greeting and supportive interaction with the traveling, with the commuting transit public.
Terrific. Thank you.
I just had a couple more. I don't know, there's something you just said that sort of triggered this for me, and I don't know if you chose the term intentionally or if it was unintentional, but you said there'd be a presence on the trains. What about the buses?
Yes, we will have bus riding teams assigned to each bureau. We will be very strategic in which bus lines we choose. We've already reached out to the bus operators and to MTA to determine which buses and which lines are most problematic, and we will be deploying officers accordingly. So those bus riding teams will literally be officers riding buses from one line to another, and we've already charted out many of those routes throughout the day. So you would ride one problem bus line to another and then get on that and ride it and circle back. So we really are looking at, because we can't touch every bus line and every bus in the city, there are just too many, looking at where the biggest problems are first and working through those.
Has MTA given you any parameters about how much coverage of trains they want versus buses?
Yes. In this proposal, as you know as a board member, there have been a number of studies with recommended levels of patrols and presence, if you will, this felt presence, and our proposal was responsive to that and met those, and in some instances exceeded it. And so we wanted to ensure that we're meeting the expectations of the MTA that have been identified through a number of studies. And that's where you have the bus presence and you have the rail presence and the platform presence. Again, all of that is dialable. It's all, and there's a contingency here should there be greater risks to the system. This is critical infrastructure that we can dial up that level, so there will be a super presence when necessary. And as Commander Clark indicated, particularly on the bus lines, we believe, just as the Dash experience has shown in the last year, that when we put officers on quote-unquote previously problematic lines, that there is a restoration of order, and we can solve that and then move on to another location with periodic maintenance, if you will, update. Currently, though, there's hundreds of these bus lines that have just not had a physical presence of an officer for some time, and some of the conditions have deteriorated as far as decorum, if you will.
And as much as we love the trains, the buses are the core of the metro system.
Yes.
It's how most people intersect with mass transit in Los Angeles.
We understand that. There's a significant portion of this deployment is on those bus lines, and it's been identified in the contract, but well over each of the portion of the city, approximately 30-plus officers are there each day.
All right. I'll be wanting to follow up more on that as this goes into effect. According to one of the documents we had in Metro back in November, it said that sworn personnel assigned on an overtime basis only will be required to meet strict rules and regulations prior to being selected. Who comes up with those requirements, and what are they, and what impact might they have on the pool of folks eligible to work?
So Metro was their experience with line officers is they want a minimum level of service time. So that's a 2-year period of time. Officers who are on probation will not be allowed to work these details, so they have to be a permanent member of the organization. They also have to be someone who's not been subject to serious or significant discipline recently. So they want to ensure that they're having our best representatives, and we want the best representatives as well. And so we've worked mutually with that criteria, and those are the individuals that will be authorized after the training, which we've trained nearly 2,000 personnel. In what it takes to work a rail line, what it takes to work a bus line, and those will be the only ones that are quote-unquote qualified. We expect that number to grow to over 4,000 to 5,000 within the coming months of a qualified pool of candidates to work these.
And what penalties are there for the City of Los Angeles if we drop below the required staffing levels?
Well, the department's intention is that we're going to meet the operational needs. There are provisos that, as I understand it, and this may be appropriate for the city attorney or for the CAO to respond, but our intention is that we'll meet those. If there's an emergency or disaster, an earthquake, we had one last night, that were to turn this city upside down, and we'd have an emergency or crisis that would impact our service levels, for instance, on these buses, we believe that the good faith effort would be, first of all, recognizing the critical nature of infrastructure, of transportation for us to be there anyways, and maintain that. Secondly is that the entire department can mobilize and we can build up to maintain our staffing levels that are needed during an emergency.
Okay. I appreciate that you hope that there won't be a problem, but I'm asking if there is, what does the contract say?
So,
I mean, this contract took a long time.
Right. So
I'm sure there's some provision.
So I would look to the city attorney and the CAO's office, and that we're not attorneys. I can tell you that we're I'll put it in a simple man's language, mine. We're at the table. We're obligated to meet these service standards. If we don't, then obviously the NPA can come to the city and expect that that we perform to the requirements of the contract.
Right. Do you have any idea, Tyler?
Just that we are going to get reimbursed for our expenses. So they have the purse that they can limit what they pay us. We would need to talk with the city attorney to see if there are any other penalties.
I'd be curious if someone could let me know.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Again, thanks, Mr. Chair. You mentioned about the training on the bus and rail operations. 2,000 of our officers have already been trained to date, and we're anticipating another 2,000 to 3,000 more officers to be trained. And what would be the process? Do they have to first? I mean, they would all be qualified, obviously, unless they have to be over 2 years of experience on the field. And what would be the timeline of our officer being trained to full capacity?
Okay, we don't necessarily expect that every single person in the organization will be trained, but those who want the training are being allowed to sign up for it on the Coast system. That training is being done off-duty, and we are being fully compensated for it by MTA. So it's not taking officers away from their regular duties to go to this training. The first half of that training is rail safety training. That's mandated by the state in order to work the rail system. That's what we're pushing forth first. We are still in the process of crafting a 4-hour training block that will be in-house, that will also be reimbursed by MTA, and that will be more on expectations, bus and rail tactics, things of that nature. So we expect that we will be able to meet the demand of those in the department that want this training, and we'll go heavy for the next few months until that demand diminishes. And then in subsequent years, we'll offer it periodically because we recognize as each group of officers comes off probation at the end of their 18 months, that's a new group of people that are available to go through the training.
And lastly, if I can, I turn to the chairman on this issue, but some of the Facebook feeds and concerns have been raised by some of our residents in the harbor area communities. They felt that and this was brought up during budget hearing, that some of the cash overtime reduction in cash OT had an impact in this next fiscal cycle, had an impact because of this contract. Is that true or not?
So let me address that as the chief of operations. Our overtime monies that the organization has been provided by the city this last year was $90 million. The contract for the Metro overtime is a separate account at $41 million. The organization will work Metro rail and bus services on an overtime basis from that second account. We will run operations as well as special operations and all of the policing on an overtime basis from the general or master account, which at this point, by the current budget before the committee and before the city council, I believe is that $80 million. As the chief said last Thursday, our overtime is about 90, well, one could say 100% reactionary in the sense of going to court, working extended watch on a SWAT call-out, workload driven rather than dialed and pre-scheduled. So we don't, while we recognize the proposal is for us to find $10 million in overtime efficiencies, and the expectation, we will continually strive to find efficiencies, but in our ability, should we find the inability to control court overtime or extended watch because of increased call load and increased workload, then we will shift to a compensatory time basis and not limit our ability to remain in the field and work public safety emergencies and public safety issues.
I clearly remember those days when we are tapped out on our cash OT, then went straight to CTO.
And
actually, so that's the game plan in 17-18.
Yes, in fact, we're still benefit from. There were years in which this organization was required to work 90% of its overtime on a compensatory basis. We're grateful that at this point that is inverted. We would certainly, and we recognize the fiscal constraints the city's struggling through.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you. Thanks,
Mr. Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple minor questions. I think most of my colleagues hit it all. And I've certainly been briefed on this many times, so thank you for that. For how many shifts can one of our transit officers work on OT per DP? What's the max?
The max will be based on a number of hours, and so let me back up and explain how the system is going to work. The coast overtime system is a randomizer. So if I as an officer sign up for 5 or 6 details on my days off, I first must sign up for a detail that is at least 8 hours after my scheduled end of watch from my last working shift and concludes 8 hours before my next working shift.
Does it also include any OT that was worked on your regular shifts? So in other words, how many hours you're actually working, period?
No.
Shouldn't it?
Well, what we're doing right now is we're trying to maintain, we will maintain where officers work a capped number of hours every week and per 4-week period.
Including overtime?
Scheduled overtime. If they have a court appearance, an on-call, for instance, an officer who's on call, as you know, receives 3 hours of compensatory overtime. That would not go into that. However, we are mindful that we're not wanting to see officers work 70, 80, 90, 100 hours in a week.
But that's not programmed into it if they have non-scheduled overtime besides transit.
Other than the rest period.
And the watch, whatever it might be.
The rest period before and after is what's meant to give them sufficient time. The caveat that we're trying to control here is that the complexity of our systems to be able to identify that Mike Moore worked overtime on Monday for 3 hours beyond my regular end of watch, and I was scheduled to work Wednesday.
Well, I don't think Mike Moore's entitled to overtime.
Well, so there's a Mike Moore in West LA that is.
Oh, okay.
And so let's use that
Talk
Mike
about
Moore.
him.
But to that Michael Moore in West LA, if he's off on he worked overtime on Monday, he's off on a full day on Tuesday. Wednesday, he's scheduled to work on an MTA overtime detail, and there's 8 hours before he starts his Thursday. We believe that there's sufficient buffers hours in there to ensure that officer gets safety and is going to work safely and is properly rested. We are going to work through this, though, to ensure that, just as you've identified, if an officer, let's take a Michael Moore that's working a SWAT caper and is out there for 16 or 20, 24 hours, has 8 hours off, but then was scheduled to come to work on an MTA contract, that instance, that officer, first of all, always has the ability to tap out and say, I'm not ready for this shift. We as an organization will look at and ensure that the officer is not overextended.
Let's do this. Let's do this. I think based on all the questions that my colleagues asked, I want to move this forward. I have one thing I want to address that was brought up on the overtime issue and the funding that you went into, and I just want to address that. But my recommendation is going to be that we move this forward and ask the department to report back to this committee every 6 months with an update of all of these issues that were brought up. And I think that's really important to keep our eyes and ears on it as well, and we've got a responsibility to do that. So if the department can just report back on all of these issues every 6 months, regularly scheduled every 6 months, we could just put it on the agenda to have an update.
Absolutely.
That would be great. Okay. To address just quickly on the overtime issue, we had an MOU with the department, with the Police Protective League, on how much we would actually, and I was part of this conversation in the EERC. So I remember the spirit in which we negotiated and approved this, and it was how much money we should put into overtime and to ensure that we don't get back into the CTO days, right? And so the idea there was that we would fund a ramp up of 80, 90, and then 100 million going into this fiscal year, $100 million to cover overtime. What the MOU did not include, and nor was there any conversation on, was what those officers may or may not be doing. It was just a matter of having more officers visible on the streets and giving our officers an opportunity to work more and do more to $100 million, even though we weren't even spending $100 million in overtime, or roughly around there. That was part of it. The other part of it was that even if we were able to manage, if the department were able to manage their overtime and keep it at 80 or 90 million, that extra bump would then allow more visibility, more opportunity to do policing throughout our communities, and the Police Protective League were pushing for that, particularly in light of what was happening with different pieces of legislation and knowing that crime is going to start probably going up, and which it is. And so I think it was in all of our best interest. The council, the mayor, the department, and the league all supported that. This budget, it did not take into account a transit contract. That was nowhere on the horizon. There was no thought of it whatsoever at the time. And so now we're fulfilling the obligation under the MOU, I believe, with funding $120 million of overtime in this fiscal year coming up. That includes the transit contract. Now, what I don't believe, personally, is that while it meets the letter of the law in the MOU language and what the department has pledged, it does not meet the spirit into which we negotiated, or the spirit into the contract of what we hope to accomplish. And this was not the police department's doing. This was presented to the Budget and Finance Committee for consideration by the budget team that put this together in the mayor's office. So this is the conversation we had on Thursday. And I believe we, in the interest of the department, that the intention was to have $100 million in overtime for operations, and with no other units. Again, I think it passes the legal smell test, but I don't believe it's what everybody intended to have. My primary concern now, though, over this is the replacement of the new officers that are going into the unit full-time, not the ones that are running it on OT, but just to run the operations, and particularly civilians. We don't have an aggressive civilian hiring plan. We don't have what's coming up in this year's fiscal budget in what was presented so far to us. And we're still in those discussions of replacements of those civilians. So we've got a massive civilian shortage now because of this agreement. And with that, officers will most likely be doing that civilian work. So I just want to put that on the table. I want to have that included back in our every 6-month update from the department on how we're doing on that as well. Hopefully with the intention from Budget and Finance, we'll see what comes out of that to replace some of those civilians and beef that up as well. So without any other further recommendations, we'll go ahead and vote on that. Approval? All right, so that is approved with the one recommendation to come back every 6 months with a report. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, our next item, if we can, we have one speaker card on item 9 from Rick. I'm not even going to try that, but Wallow, well, I was going to try it, but Rick with Harris. Wallow Chaddock?
I'm used to this, by the way.
I figured, I was going to say.
Thank you. You were very close. It's Rick Wallachachuk.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Honorable committee members, good morning, and thank you very much for your time. My name is Rick Wallachachuk, the Harris Channel Management Team. I am here today representing the Harris Corporation on your agenda, item number 9, relative to the equipment purchase of replacement radios for the Los Angeles Police Department and Los Angeles Fire Department. Members of the committee are in receipt of Harris's letter describing our concerns with the LAPD and CAO reports submitted to the committee for this item. Although there are several inaccuracies contained in both reports and subsequently cited in our letter, I wanted to emphasize two great concerns of an importance to Harris. The LAPD staff report stated more than once that the Harris radio posed an officer safety issue regarding the radio's emergency trigger behaviors that Harris modified to the department's stated satisfaction prior to the end of this informal evaluation. Variances in radio behaviors are not uncommon between radio manufacturers. The Harris XL200 is a software-defined radio that can accommodate various applications, features, and functionalities when those applications and behaviors are properly outlined and communicated in a requirements document. The confusion over emergency behavior could have been avoided with a clearly stated feature and functionality criteria document. And to be clear, no such document was ever received nor has ever been received by Harris. The second concern of great importance...
I got to ask you
I'm
to
sorry.
wrap it up. Did you have this submitted to us already in writing?
The letter...
Whatever you're reading
No,
right now.
I do not.
Do you have a copy of it?
I do, yes.
If you can give it to the clerks, we can all just get a copy. That would be great. But if you've got a closing statement, go ahead and give us a closing statement. But if we can get that in writing, that would be helpful.
Okay, I thought I had 2 minutes. I apologize.
That's okay.
Not the case?
1 minute.
Okay, I'm sorry. The second issue really is the absence of any kind of formal procurement process. And this is of great concern for us, especially in such a significant bid. And our request is that set aside this award and procurement, return both reports to the departments requesting a proper and objective evaluation. Thank you very much.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, if we can ask various departments to all step forward, please. And
Good morning.
morning.
I'm George Villegas from the Office of Administrative Services, LAPD, and we have Dan Gomez from the Tactical Technology Section from LAPD.
Hato from the CAO office.
Guy Tomlinson, Battalion Chief, LA City Fire.
All right, thank you. Who wants to open it up?
I can open it up. This report requests the adoption of a resolution to enter into a lease purchase agreement in an amount not to exceed $64.5 million with Motorola Solutions to purchase a total of 19,500 radios for the police and fire departments. The 2016-17 adopted budget authorized the acquisition of 17,500 radios. After the adoption of the budget, the police and fire departments identified an additional 2,000 radios that needed to be replaced. Therefore, this report also requests for the approval to acquire 2,000 additional radios. The police and fire department requested Motorola and Harris Daily Wells to participate in a side-by-side technical comparison and user field test to determine which radios best meet the needs of the city. After careful evaluation based on technical specifications, user experience, and facility support, both fire and police determined that the Motorola radios were the best fit. After this evaluation, both vendors were asked to submit their best financing offer. Overall, Motorola's financing offer was the lowest by approximately $270,000. Under Motorola's financing offer, the city will lease the radios over a 6-year period with the option to purchase. The first lease payment will occur 2 years after the execution of the contract and annually thereafter, which means each lease payment will be $12.9 million and will be paid out of funds in the Capital Finance Administration Fund. Since the release of this report, Motorola has given the city an extension through June 30 to complete negotiations and execution of the contract and kept the terms the same as the original proposal. So the pricing has not changed. The total cost will still be $64.5 million. I'm happy to answer any financing questions you may have, and we have representatives from Fire and Police Department and General Services Department to answer any questions regarding the radios and the procurement process as well.
Great, thank you very much. I know there are several questions from my colleagues. Before I turn it over to them real quick, just one question, then I'll come back to me for my questions. Total cost, did that include all costs, including financing, including taxes, including that the schedule was not attached on costs?
Yes, the $64.5 million includes the interest costs. So there's the principal and interest payment.
Really, because it says principal only on your report. So let's go ahead and turn it over to, before I get into my questions, I'll let you look that up again and answer it when I come back. We'll turn it over to Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you. Do those costs also include a maintenance plan of the radios?
There is a 5-year warranty. The proposal includes a 5-year warranty. I think police and fire could speak more on the warranty.
A 5-year warranty. And what's the lifespan of the radios?
The useful life of the radios are about 8 years.
About 8. Okay. All right. And so the radios that we currently have, how old are they?
Those radios were acquired in, I believe, in 2008.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, they're between 8 to 10 years old, depending on when we actually acquired them.
And so the industry standard for a lifespan is 8 years old?
It's about 7 years.
About 7. And what kind of radios are they, the old ones? Just out of curiosity. What brand?
They're also Motorola's.
The Motorola's? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the report states that there's a discount of $2.5 million being offered up until March 30th. Is that discount still being offered?
Yes, that discount is being honored. Motorola extended the deadline to June 30.
Okay, so that's included in the $64.5 million
yes.
price. Okay. So hypothetically, if an RFP was issued, would the specifications and grading scale differ from the ones that were used in the field test? If hypothetically an RFP were issued?
Well, I think that, to begin with, in terms of a hypothetical RFP, I think the current lifespan of these radios ends in 2018. So we go to an RFP process, I think it'd be about an 18-month process, between 15 and 18 months. So we'd be pushing as it relates to that. In terms of the specs, we'd have to identify, go into the entire process of identifying in very detail the specs so that it goes out to not just Motorola and Harris, but it goes out to other people.
Right.
In this process that we engaged in was already within the spirit and the laws of the City of Los Angeles. We conferred with the City Attorney's Office. Mm-hmm. We have an existing commodities contract already. So it was just within the process that we engaged in that allowed for us to move forward with the recommendation to purchase these radios.
Clear. So you're operating within an existing contract, and you're simply selecting a purchase plan for the desired radios.
Yes, and I think one of the important components of this, the desired radios, is that when fire department looked at their radio and when the police department looked at the radio, they were done independent of each other. Mm-hmm. There was no commingling of review, and in fact, I think the fire department can speak to the differences in terms of what they need for their radio and what the police department's need for the radios are. So they're independent of each other, and both came to the same conclusion. The other important component is the interoperability. We currently don't have that with the fire department now. With these new radios, we'll be able to immediately go into a situation where we can have discussions live. So if we had an earthquake or so, something of significance, of value, with these new radios, we'd be actually operable instantly.
Okay, you can have real-time conversations leading up to arriving on an incident
Yes.
with departmentally, and you couldn't before.
Yeah, we struggle with that now.
Struggle, and you're currently struggling with that.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. So, question on the reason why we didn't go out to a competitive bid process. So, knowing that the lifespan of the existing radios would due to expire in 2018, or did we know that the existing lifespan would expire in 2018? Shouldn't we have began the process a lot sooner, knowing that it takes 18 months for the city to move forward on a competitive bid process?
But we didn't need to go into competitive
Because you
bid.
have
We have an existing,
contract.
We already have that in process and in place, and we worked within the system of the city, and within the system, we also conferred with the city attorneys to make sure we were, fair in the process that we engaged in, and that's what we did.
I just wanted to make sure we're getting big bang for our buck here. This is a big purchase.
Again, I can't speak to the financing piece. I think that when you look at a request for independent last and final best offer, if you will, in terms of the finance, I believe that the CEO's position is that the financing is best done through a Motorola purchase.
Understood, Chief. And then I understand that our existing radios don't meet current FAA frequency standards, and these new radios will meet those standards?
They do meet current, but they're not. The current radios that we have are not going to meet the future standards. I think the future standards begin in 2021, or
Yes, sir. So you're absolutely right.
So that may pose an officer safety issue, is that my understanding, if we don't meet those frequency standards in the years to come?
That's correct. And the radios we selected will get us through not only where we are today, but through the life of the contract, where the FCC is going. And as the USC, as the LA RICS position is built out, also works within that as well. So Band 14 is essentially what we're talking about.
And our neighboring law enforcement agencies, are they making the same purchase or not?
well, I think that the LA County Sheriff's, CHP, our large partners have the Motorola radios.
The same types that we anticipate in purchasing with this, what's before us? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I have a lot. You want to chime in? Yes, ma'am.
Melissa Usalon, General Services Department. I just want to clarify in regards to the competitive bid process that the purchasing agent does have current existing contracts with both the Motorola radios as well as the Harris radios, and that is why there was no need to release another competitive bid. Both radios were accessible via both agreements for testing, and once a determination was made on which radio met the needs of fire department as well as police department, they were able to proceed with moving forward with acquiring the equipment.
That's fine. I trust your all judgment on that. So I obviously, with my existing relationships with street cops today, I tend to get a text message or a call on some of the issues that may be faced on working the streets, whether it relates to training and other issues that they may face on the streets. I have, in the last several years, I've never been approached with an officer, a friend of mine, who has called me and said, these radios are horrible. You got to do something about it. So I don't know more if this may be an insurance moving forward to ensure that these purchase of $65 million worth of radios is more of an insurance policy, or is it more of an operation issue? I just want to get your take on, are we in a sense of urgency to purchase these new radios? Because last time I turned on my radio, it was working clearly without any issues.
Yeah, so your radio should be working clearly because its lifespan doesn't expire until 2018. But in 2018, we may not have that same conversation. So these are, again, these radios that the officers are using are the ones that they're happy with, but we need to move forward and we need to advance and we need to modernize, and that's what we need to do as it relates to the lifespan of these radios, because they are expiring. Again, I mentioned
And technology is ever changing.
Correct, and we're moving forward with regulations from the FCC.
Okay.
And this just moves us into that modern way of communicating.
So, Councilman, some direct benefits to your technology question is...
Please, too, because I got to warrant this purchase when I go back to my residence. We have an empty jail in the harbor area, and we know we're going to be spending $65 million of radios. That can clearly go towards attention officers.
Yeah, absolutely understand. So the
help
radios that
help
we
me
have,
warrant that, yes.
The radios that we have today essentially are going to be 10 years old in technology, and there's not the parts for them anymore. So the kind of reliability that you have today is because we have a partner that supports them, we have all the equipment for it, we keep them up and running, and the staff supports them. After they expire, we won't have that anymore. So then those texts will start to come, hey, I have something that doesn't work, isn't really effective. We don't want to be in that position, which is why we started this process, in the 15, 16-year budget cycle. The other thing is the new radios really have increased in battery capacity. So where before you would have a battery that, at about 10 to 12 hours, you would think about hearing it chirp, and, it was just kind of part of doing work. The new batteries have go 17 hours, so that's hopefully, again, one of those things that we just eliminate from them, so that's a positive for the officers in the field, as well as the technology that the chief checked a box on in terms of being able to talk to other agencies. So as the systems are built out and as we can talk to the fire department, today, if I have the fire person at the end of the table, our interoperability is us each having our own radio staying next to each other. Well, now we don't have to do that. We can each just carry one radio, talk to each other. Same with the neighboring divisions that have different frequency plans. We can now add them to ours and also communicate with them using the existing radios. So those are all benefits that, again, hopefully if we do this correctly, there isn't a big jump. They simply get them and they feel like, gosh, I still have a good radio with me and it works as it's designed.
Right. Thank you so much for the explanation. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Ponda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. I want to make sure I'm clear on how much money we're talking about here. I know that we're talking about a principal amount of $64.5 million. The budget authorized up to $91 million. So what is the maximum we are authorizing with this agreement?
So this agreement, the total cost for this agreement is $64.5 million. That includes the principal plus the interest. If you want to break it down, the principal amount is about $57, and the interest cost is about $7.5 million. Your total cost is $64.5 million.
That's total. That cannot change.
That cannot change.
What about change orders and stuff?
Can
Motorola come back and increase the cost?
If you add additional radios beyond the 19,500, there may be additional costs, but the cost for the 19,500 radios will be $64.5 million.
Okay. How there was at some point a side-by-side comparison by sworn personnel with the Motorola and the Harris?
Yes, so I think that the fire department can talk about their side-by-side comparison and how because theirs was different than ours and independent than the way the LAPD did it, and then Dan can talk about the details of how we did our side-by-side comparison.
For fire, to answer a couple questions also, we've been interoperable for since 2000, just after 2001, after 9/11. We bought radios that were a single band UHF. We bought another portable radio that was VHF, and then our own 800 megahertz platform. So we've always had 3 radios on our apparatus to be completely interop with all our surrounding agencies. A lot of money involved there. That's why we're very interested in going into an all-band radio so we can reduce that profile of having to buy so many radios. To us, what is being interoperability? Being able to communicate, not just side by side, but unit to unit, but also as we saw in the Laker Parade or the Laker Celebration, the 2007 Cessna, the 2008 Merrick, the 2009 Cessna, the 2008 Sayer Fire, and I can keep going down the list, where the officers ran out of battery life in their radios. They were able to go to a fire station or to a fire apparatus and get a charge or change batteries out. That's truly being interoperable for the city of Los Angeles with our law partners as they're trying to do evacuations in an emergency or when they're trying to maintain peace. So to me, that's what interop is. It's just not being in the unified command post but it's truly firefighter, police officer, side by side, and then also being able to support each other in the operations.
But that's not what I meant by side-by-side comparison. I mean, LAFD personnel tested both the Harris and the Motorola, both of which offer all the interoperability features you just mentioned, right?
Yes, sir. And so on the interop side, that's important to us. On the side-by-side comparison, we had our firefighters go out and they tested, the firefighters that tested the Harris radios also tested the Motorola radios in fireground conditions, emergency medical service conditions, and just regular training. Full turnout, suited up in a live fire training environment in the burn containers, and then also on roof cutting operations, and then also working in just a regular EMS call where they're just in their regular uniform, not in their turnouts. Key components to us is we change our clothes. We have a turnout coat pocket. Once the radio goes in the pocket, you can't see the radio anymore. It's gone. All you have is your remote speaker mic. Both of them offer a larger remote speaker mic, but this radio here offered channel selector on top, emergency trigger that was protected, easier to identify, but it also has a volume control. It also has repeat direct. It also has the audio files telling us if we're in repeat and direct. If our firefighters are down in a basement and they lose connectivity to our repeater system, they have to go to direct. The old radio, they'd have to open the turnout code up, flip the knob to put it in direct mode, and then be able to communicate. Now we can do it on the fly, and it's telling you. There's no mistake in that.
Which one are you holding?
Right now I'm holding the Motorola radio.
Okay.
And the other difference with police and fire is we needed the ruggedized radio. The ruggedized radio is important because of the different environments we go in and what we're doing, always in the positions. As far as being interoperable between the two radios, they're both P25 compliant. They both can have the same channels, but truly being interoperable beyond the P25 and for the city of Los Angeles, being on the same platforms at best.
So the features you just talked about, the buttons and stuff like that, Harris does not offer those?
No, sir, they were not on the radio that they provided to us.
And how long was the side-by-side comparison conducted?
It was 58 days from the beginning to the end on the side-by-side comparison. However, that 58 days was severely skewed. One of the vendors, Harris Radio, was unable to provide us the radios for 38 days.
So it wasn't a 58-day.
It was not a true. It was supposed to have been. That was the opportunity that was there.
But it was 20 days.
So for the Harris Radio, they had a 20-day evaluation, and then for the Motorola, they had obviously.
So the side-by-side was 20. Okay. You guys have had a negative experience with Motorola recently, though, haven't you?
No, sir. In which way?
I've been told that a couple years ago, the current batch of Motorola handhelds, that you have developed a calcium deposit on the battery connections that inhibited the powering of the radios and rendered them unreliable for firefighters. Apparently, the radios had fallen out of warranty by then, and LAFD had to pay an additional $1.5 million to Motorola to resolve the issue.
I'm not sure on those figures, sir. I came into this position in 2015, and since I've been in this position in 2014, there was some issues that my predecessor and the captain that was there before had identified, and they're working with our service representatives from Motorola. There's a whole email string on that with the documentation. It was clearly identified. Motorola had given ITA, who was supposed to be maintaining our radios, the service bulletin of the deoxit pen that should alleviate that problem as it was starting to begin. It did not continue through. We never got those deoxit pens, so that was not being done in the field, and it was not being done at ITA. Now, fast forward to me coming in.
Wait, I want to pause on that one, because this is where sort of what I've heard diverges a little bit from what you're saying. My understanding was that Motorola had issued a product advisory that gave instructions, best practices on how to prevent this problem, which disabled the radios. But it was never distributed to LAFD. I'm told it was Motorola that dropped the ball. You're saying it was ITA that dropped the ball?
No, sir. I'm saying collectively the ball was dropped, And with that, there was a pen that was supposed to be put on the battery contacts on both the battery and the radio. That deoxit did not get applied to the plating. So can I point the finger at Motorola for not giving that to us? Can I point the finger at ITA for not providing it when they went through a manpower, a reduction in their staff? Can I point it to fire for not knowing that, being able to get that? Would I like to have every notice given to me? Yes. So somewhere between there was a problem with us not knowing about it, but we did follow up on it.
I know, but see, if it's a question of somebody having to pay $1.5 million because the ball was dropped, I want to know who dropped the ball, because the ball didn't fall by itself. Someone had it and dropped it. So, Ted, is there anything ITA wants to say?
I'm going to ask him to come up.
Okay, all right.
As Mr. Ross is approaching, I'm not aware of the 1.5 million, sir.
Okay.
There was 580,000, I believe, but not 1.5 million.
Ted Ross, General Manager with the Information Technology Agency. I would certainly have to bring in the right staff to be able to provide background on that. We're more than willing to be able to provide the information. Public safety communications is absolutely our top priority, so the maintenance and care of our radio systems is always top of bill. So for this item specifically, whether it was something unique to Motorola or something that would have happened with any of the other vendors, I'd have to get the additional information to be able to provide that for you.
Okay, all right. That's something that, if that's something where Motorola dropped the ball, then that makes me question why we didn't do an RFP. Now, I understand the rationale for not doing the RFP. It's legal, it's fine, CAO said we can do it. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars for incredibly important equipment, and I think it's surprising that there was not at least a more deliberate discussion with at least this committee about whether or not to do an RFP. Because what really annoys the hell out of me, frankly, is when this issue comes to us and we ask about whether or not we should do an RFP, and we're told, oh, it's too late to do one now, which is essentially what we just heard. And I don't think that's a good way to do business.
Okay, thank you with that. And I also want to say, sir, let me just start off now, if I could. We've heard you. And we've also heard when Councilmember Bonin just asked, were there any other histories with Motorola? You said no. And then immediately, we found out there was. So I'm going to ask for all the copies of all the emails that you suggested you had, that we all review them, because I think that was a little out of line. With that, when this came to me and I learned about it, this ship had sort of already sailed, and I was being told under strict pressure that we're about to lose significant reductions and incentives that was being offered to us, and I didn't even know we were field testing these at the time. And I'm the chair of the committee and had no idea until recently. But in listening to all the comments from my committee members, I'm going to ask for a number of report backs. But before I do, I'm going to ask Mr. Ross, chair of ITA, how involved were you as the chair of the department? And I don't want to say of the department. This is a technology acquisition, and one of the most critical ones that we could actually purchase for the entire city of Los Angeles. How involved were you throughout and from the beginning of this process?
It's a process that as I reached out to my staff, it is not something that I was personally involved with. And as I reached out to my staff, I think some individual staff members had some participation, but some of my managers over the radio systems and some of the radio engineering side did not have a lengthy or an extensive involvement.
And were you consulted with the idea and the sort of on the global technology discussion for all things being the city, particularly those as they relate to public safety and needs assessments and what we need to be doing and purchasing? Were you involved in those discussions?
For this item, I was not.
Okay. Have they shared with you, and to get your input on, if I wanted to ask you, they did this side-by-side comparison that they keep talking about, but we haven't seen copies of the methodology, the actual reports from the officers, Haven't seen any of the correspondence as it relates to the field testing. It says it's attached, but there's no attachment. It says it was conducted, and also says it's been reviewed, and ITA was part of that process. Have you seen the actual outcomes of the field testing?
I have not. And I think something worth noting is that in previous reviews, the one that was around 10 years ago, ITA was personally involved in lab tests. And for this item, we were not.
Okay. I don't know why. That bothers me a little bit, quite frankly. I'm not as concerned as some of the issues that were brought up personally for me as the RFP. And I know Harris brought those up too, and I want to address those because Harris too is a contractor. And so they were able to bid on those as well. But I'm more concerned with how we got to the point with where we are at today in process. I also want to echo Joe Buscaino's comments about the radios we have now and any issues we're having in the field. I haven't heard of any. In fact, I've asked several officers since I first found out about this, from field officers to UCs to you name it, about do they want new radios, what do they think, are they having any problems, and all across the board. I didn't hear from one out of dozens and dozens of officers I spoke to about the idea of needing any new ones. Now, fire may be a little different, but in terms of PD, I said, well, if you had a technology decision or choice to make as an officer, what would you think? I said, well, the fact that it takes us an hour to boot up our computer in a station and get online to many of the things we need to do, that I think would be a priority, because if you multiply that across the field of every single officer that has to go jump into a station on a computer and do reports and lookups and research, all those hours and hours and hours of wasted time is very frustrating. And then oftentimes you finally get onto the system and then it crashes. So there's a lot of other technological needs as well. I think there's I'm just going to go off a list of some questions that I think we want to report back on. Before I do, I want one last issue. The battery issue, I think, needs its own discussion. And the battery issue, one of interoperability, one of the idea of hot and cold swaps right now, for those that don't know what all that means, who are listening in, officers today, as well as fire, are sworn have hot batteries, which means they're fully charged. And we have a plethora of batteries. We have batteries at every kit room. Every officer has an extra battery on them all the time at a minimum of one, often two, depending on what kind of situation or where they're going to work. Oftentimes these extra batteries, extra capacity batteries under this proposal are 12-hour batteries versus the 8 to 10 we have now. The difference is that we don't have all the extra batteries. In fact, there's no inventory list for what we're buying at all. We don't have a list. Has ITA reviewed a list of all of the equipment and peripherals and batteries?
We tend to check them all in as a part of the support and maintenance.
As we receive them, but have you seen the acquisition list?
I'd have to double check with our Pipe Protect maintenance folks.
Because if we go into the report back, it says it's attached as exhibit, I think it's B. Schedule A equipment list. Here it is. So I've reviewed it. Let's see. This is it. For $65 million, this is what we get. It's blank, colleagues. So we've got to see some of these things. So the battery issues, though, I wanted to see how many batteries we're buying, because right now the ability, and what I was told in my briefing, is that every officer would get a battery but not a secondary battery. And they would be responsible for the charging of that battery and making sure that it's fully charged. The problem is often you'll have an officer working beyond a 12-hour shift, or they'll leave their radio on overnight. They'll forget to shut it off. They'll throw it in the car. They'll throw it in their tack vest. They'll keep it in their holster. And they show up the next day and there's not another battery to swap it out with like they're used to, or they'll have secondary batteries with them. This is a change in operations from what I was told, so I think we need to report just on that issue. And I'm just going to, these are from the concerns that my colleagues brought up and some of the issues I think we need to report back on. I mean, I very much want to move this forward, but I think we need to do it eyes wide open. The complete equipment list, including a full inventory of accessories and peripherals. We need to see a copy of the warranty. There was an issue was brought up that it's under warranty, but the warranty runs out before the payments due. So that was a concern, including an explanation of its terms to the context of both the 6-year lease period and the economic use of life. One of the terms of art that I saw in the report back, and I'd like ITA to weigh in on this as well. I'm not sure what an economic use of life means in terms of technology. I've never heard that term. I've looked it up. It doesn't exist in anywhere I can find it. I'm sure it's out there somewhere because it was in the police department's report. But I've asked several people of what that meant, and I haven't gotten a definition of economic use of life. So I'd like to see what that means. An explanation of the statement that this radio system is nearing its end of life cycle is what it's saying to these radios now. It was stated that there's, by the department in this hearing, that there are no more parts or there won't be soon available. So I'd like Motorola to report back. How many other departments, agencies are there that use the radios we have today? When do you expect to stop making, and I'd like this on the record for all the departments out there beyond us, when do you stop hoping to service these radios and or parts for the radios that we have today? Because we've got, there's computers out there that are 20 years old they still make parts for. They run slow, but with radios, we need to know what that really means. I think we need a full explanation based on the 2020 federal mandate. Is it a mandate? Is it something they're gearing towards? It's something that's done. There's been no explanation on that, so I think we need a full explanation on that. A copy of the installation, removal, and service agreements with a breakdown of the associated cost and work to be performed by the vendor or any subs, LAPD or other city departments. And that includes, by the way, the 1,500 in-car installs. Are we installing radios for cars that are at their end of life? So if we've got a car we're about to get rid of, why are we replacing the radios? Is there a phase out and phase in for that? So I think we need to see a breakdown of cars on that. And then finishing up here, I know we're getting to the end of the committee. The written copies and the methodologies of all the side-by-side comparisons in the field testing that was provided, as well as the oral interviews that were recorded and transposed. So I believe there were, according to the report, there were both written and oral report backs from the officer in the field testing. So we'd like to see that as well as the technical comparisons of both radios. I think we also need a technical comparison of the current Motorola radio versus the new Motorola radio, both from police and fire. There was a statement that says that Motorola is providing an advantage when leveraging existing infrastructure and features already deployed as part of the platform, as well as in-progress system updates. So I think we need to know what are the in-progress system updates, and is that something else that should have been bid, or we should be looking at, or were there side comparisons, and what are we spending on those upgrades? Don't know exactly what that was in reference to. A copy of the finance agreement, which wasn't attached, which, by the way, colleagues, I want to point out that there's a late fee for payments at 6% for anything that's over 10 days late. There's a concern there. I don't know of a single contract in the city of LA that we've made payments to within a 10-day payment period. That doesn't happen. And so I think we need contract administration and Department of Finance to weigh in on that. That's a concern. Maybe Motorola is willing to waive a late fee as well. And the explanation of the option to buy provision. And so I believe we had that in our last, we'll bring it back in the report. The explanation of the provision to buy is I believe we had that in our last contract. So if we have a provision to buy in the existing radios, what are we doing with those radios? Are we selling them on the secondary market? What's the value? Did we buy them? What was the end of life payment option on those? So we'd like that reported back as well. I think that covers it, colleagues, if there's anything else. Okay, so I would ask, I want to rush this through and bring this as quick as possible. I was asked to bring it as quickly as possible, so we did that today. So how quickly can we get those report backs from the various departments? You tell me what's reasonable, and we'll schedule it.
I think that some of the questions that you asked don't necessarily pertain to the police department. I mean, in terms of the police department, we can respond relatively quickly. In terms of,
I think about 80% of them pertain to the police department, and most of them should already be in writing, but if not, the ones will have to be created. ITA hasn't looked at any of this yet. They're going to need the reports from, including the comparisons and all of the other issues. We strongly, I think, there's a consensus across the board here that the departments work much closer with ITA, who's really the experts in technology and these kinds of acquisitions as well. And so maybe you guys can all get together and figure it out and get back to me and let me know rather than put you on the spot, because that's not really fair. And asking you when, you can come back and let me know when you want it scheduled and you're ready. We can do that. Okay, yes, I know, Natalie knows. She knows exactly where things belong. Yes, yes.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I agree and appreciate your leadership on this. I think it's needed. It's a needed asset when it relates to public safety and ensuring that our officers are safe, and officer safety rather. And at the same time, with such a large purchase, you can never ask for enough information. So looking forward to getting these report backs. Thank you.
Great. Okay, then that concludes this committee. Yes.
Mr. Chair, for that last item, it will be continued in committee until those report backs come.
Until all the various reports, until they let me know. When ITA, as our lead agency in the city for everything technology, lets me know then when they're ready, we can go ahead and move this to schedule it for the committee. Okay, that concludes the agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you.